nice to meet you. How's everyone doing? Thank you for joining. I'm really excited about today's talk. And you know what? Before we start and let people join, I'd like to ask everyone here two questions. And you can answer to yourself and be honest with yourself. Uh, how many games, how many hyper casual games did you as a studio release to the stores over the time that you started developing hyper casual games? So, how many games did you prototype and release to the stores? Now that you have this number, tell me how many of those games did you kill? Meaning that you did not release them to the top charts and did not scale them. So, how many games did you release and how many of those did you kill? So, today we'll talk about flexible KPIs, and if you've ever killed a game that could have been a profitable hyper casual game. So, my name is Shai. I'm the head of product at CrazyLabs. For those who don't know CrazyLabs is a top three publisher with almost 5 billion downloads to date. We worked with over 350 developers worldwide to prototype, test, and publish their hyper casual games. Here are some of the games that we've released over time. I've put here a few of the most successful ones, and as you can see, most of them are picking 100 million downloads, and the rest are reaching this milestone rather quickly. So let's start. I want to talk about the secret sauce and what are the KPIs that you need to look at when publishing and testing a hyper casual game. Now, before we start and dive into the KPIs, I'd like to go through the hyper casual ecosystem. And I've collected this graph here that shows the total number of hyper casual games that are being released to the stores on a daily basis and on a monthly basis. Now you can see, and again, this is only hyper casual games, that on a daily basis you have over 100 games, 62 on Google Play on average, and 42 on average on iOS. So on a monthly basis, you have almost 1,300 games that are being released on iOS, and almost 1,900 games that are being released on Google Play. So you can imagine the effort and the time and dedication that is needed in order to release so many games on a daily basis to the stores. So one thing which is interesting also to look at from this graph is that you can see that during April there is a shift that is probably due to iOS 14.5 changes that caused most publishers to start testing on Google Play. So you can see the decrease on the daily games that are being released on iOS and the increase that you can see on Google Play. So now that we see that there are a lot of games that are being released on a daily basis, let's talk about the deadly funnel. Now, if you can think about all of the games, concepts, pitches that are being released and being worked on, so this is the full pie, 100% of these games. How many of those will pass the first initial testing process? So how many of those will pass the first CPI test or even the day one usage test? So I would say that if you are a very well experienced studio and you have a lot of experience, you've released a lot of games, you understand the market and the trends today. So maybe one out of four, so 25% of the games that you prototype will pass the first initial tests. If you are less of experienced studio, maybe 5% or maybe even lower than that. Now, let's say you've passed this test. How many of those games that passed the initial testing process will be scaled and released worldwide? So I don't have this number, but I can tell you that it's very low. So maybe 1% or even lower than that. So we do understand that the funnel of hyper casual is hard. There are a lot of games that are being released on a daily basis. Going through the funnel and successfully passing the tests is hard. And now that we understand that, how many of the games that you've prototyped and released have been killed, but might have been a profitable game? So we know that the funnel is hard, but maybe we can improve it. Maybe there are games that shouldn't have been killed, and you could have successfully launched them. So let's talk about the historical KPIs. All of the KPIs that we used to look at, and most publishers looked at when testing hyper casual games. So the first is CPI. Obviously, this is the first most important metric in order to understand if the game is marketable, if there is a wide audience that is looking to play and install your game. So what is the cost per install for the game? And we know that low CPI is a metric that is critical for successfully scaling a hyper casual game. The second is the day one retention. So how many of your players, how many of the players that installed the game came back after the first 24 hours since they installed the game? And the third metric that most publishers looked at is the day seven. So how many of the players that installed the game came back 7 days after they first installed the game? Now, obviously, these KPIs are important, and these are the historical KPIs that most publishers looked at, and maybe a lot of them are still looking at. Now, I want to stop here and maybe do an analysis, a few case studies. I want to show you a few examples of games, and before I tell you the answer, you can answer to yourself which of these games have the potential to become a profitable game. Let's look at the first example. So first game, 20-cent CPI, day one retention, 16%. Do you think this game has the potential to be a profitable game? So I would say maybe. The CPI is low, but the retention is very low. It doesn't meet the KPIs needed. There's a lot of work to do here, but do I know what I need to focus my efforts on? I know I need to improve retention, but how and what do I need to do in order to do that? Is this game should I drop this game or not? Obviously, since the CPI is good, I wouldn't drop the game. But let's take a look at the second example. So CPI is 20 cents. Day one is 16%. But now I see a third metric, 24-hour usage. And I see that in the first 24 hours of the game, on average, players play for 7 minutes. 7 minutes. Now we at CrazyLab have a KPI of a minimum of 16 minutes in the first 24 hours of players playing in the first 24 hours. So you can see here that 7 minutes is average. It's not great. It doesn't meet the KPI needed. But I do have a bigger picture to the game now. Now I understand what I need to put my efforts on, and we'll see that later on in this presentation. But I do know that I do have low CPI, retention is not good at all, and I have average usage in the first 24 hours. Let's take a look at a third example. So CPI is 20 cents, day one 16%, but now I have 47 minutes usage in the first 24 hours. Now that I have this data, do you think that this game has the potential to become a profitable game? I would say that you have a golden egg in your hands because you have low CPI, you have bad retention, but you have really good usage in the first 24 hours. What does this mean? It means that the core gameplay loop is fun and players want to play it. It means that they've played on average 47 minutes in the first 24 hours. If you didn't have this data, you didn't know what you need to do. You didn't know that you have something extremely good in your hands. Now, maybe you need to give your players a reason to come back. Maybe you didn't give them enough content. Maybe you didn't give them a reason to come back the second, third, fourth, fifth, whatever, in order to come back and play the game again. But if you compare this to the first example, you wouldn't understand that you have this important KPI and you didn't know what to put your efforts on. Now I want to show you a third example. So now the CPI is 35 cents. Not great. It doesn't meet the KPI needed in order to scale a game. Now retention is 16%. Very, very low. Would you kill this game? I know that many publishers would, because the CPI is not good. It's okay. Maybe you can iterate there. Retention is very bad. So you need to work a lot in order to improve this game and have it ready for scale. But if you look at this, now you have 35-cent CPI, 16% day one, but you have 47 minutes of usage. Now you do know that you have something very good on your hands. And if you didn't have this data, looking at the fourth example, you might have not put so much focus and efforts, and maybe you would have killed this game that could have been a profitable game. Now, this is something which is extremely important. Now, we looked at the historical data, we did some analysis. Let's take a look at the KPIs that we are looking at today, and what are the KPIs that you need to focus on in order to not kill a game that can be a profitable game. So obviously the first thing is the CPI. Now we saw that previously. The CPI is the first most important thing in order to understand if the game is scalable, if it's marketable, if there's a wide audience for it. But most publishers in the past, and maybe some of them today, are only testing on Facebook. Now we know that Facebook is a good metric to understand if CPI is good enough to scale the game. But Facebook is not the only channel that you need to focus your efforts in the first initial testing process. We know today that, for example, TikTok and Snapchat are extremely important channels, and there's a lot of audience there that is maybe different than Facebook, and they can still generate low CPI and predict to have low CPI and a marketable game in the future. We see that, for example, TikTok is the fifth app that reached over 3 billion downloads, and you cannot ignore this channel. Now we know that if you have low CPI on Facebook, great, this game has the potential. But if you don't have low CPI on Facebook, but you do have low CPI on TikTok, you still have a game that can be a scalable, profitable game, and you should not kill it. And it's critical to test your game on CPI phase, not only on Facebook. The second thing that you need to look at is the retention. Now we know that day one retention is a very good metric in order to understand if players want to come back and play your game, if the core gameplay loop is good, and if it's fun enough for a very wide variety of players to play. But historically, we also looked at day 7. Today we know that you should not look at day 7 in the first initial testing process. You should first focus your efforts in making sure that you have good day 1 and then get good usage. Because if you have good day 1, if you have good usage, if you have good CPI, we'll form a team that will be working together, a dedicated team with the studio, in order to add more content to the game and add enough levels and meta to improve the day 7 and make this game a profitable game. But if you put your efforts in making day 1 and day 7 in the first initial testing process, you're wasting a lot of resources and your team effort that can be saved and prototype more games in order to have better chances to pass the deadly funnel. Now we know today that if you have a good publisher, if you have a publisher that can bring a dedicated team to help you improve the game once you have good day 1, this is what you should put your efforts on. Now, the third, and I would say most important new KPI that you must look at when you test your game in the first initial testing process is the 24-hour usage. So what is the average time that the players play in the first 24 hours once they install the game? And why is this extremely important? Because it can help you predict the success. So if you even if you have low retention, if you have low day one, low day three, you can still have really good usage in the first 24 hours. And this can help you focus your and your team efforts on fixing what's important. So if you have good usage but the retention is not quite there yet, you know exactly what you need to do in order to improve your game. You need to give the players a reason to come back and play again and again. But if you didn't have this metric and you saw that you have low retention, but you didn't know that you have good usage, you might have killed the game. If you have low retention, but and you didn't know the usage, you didn't know what you need to improve. And this is a very critical KPI that you must look at in order to understand that if your game is a game that can be a profitable hyper-casual game. Now, I want to show you some real examples. We've talked about the KPIs. We looked at the historical KPIs and what are we looking at today, and we understand what you need to focus your efforts on. But take a look at real examples from recent games that we at CrazyLabs released. So the first example is Hair Dye. So Hair Dye in the initial testing process, and by the way, all of these metrics are the initial testing process. Later on, we've worked together with the studio to improve them in order to scale the game. But these are the KPIs that we took in order to understand if we should continue working on this game or we should kill it. So the first game, Hair Dye, 10-cent CPI, very, very low CPI. Day one, 34%, just over 34%, very good day one, and average 24-hour usage. Now we obviously saw that the retention is good, the CPI is good, but the average usage is just okay. And we do understand that this game has the potential to become a scalable game. And we do know what we need to put our efforts on, improving the usage and get the players to play more in the first 24 hours and later on as well. The second game, Zoom Out 3D, very recent game that was released. I think it's picking the charts now, and we can see that the CPI is 31 cent. The day one is 31%. So CPI doesn't meet the KPI needed. It's on the verge. It's okay. Day one is rather low, 31%. It doesn't meet the minimum needed in order to scale a game, but we can see that the average usage is 12.3 minutes. It's almost reaching the minimum needed in order to scale a game. Now, you saw these KPIs, and we saw it. We say, okay, we have something in our hands here. The CPI needs to be improved. The day one is not quite there yet, but the average usage is quite okay. We understand what we need to put our efforts on. We should not kill this game, and obviously, this is a very successful, profitable game. Third example, phone case DIY. 28-cent CPI, day one, 36%. Average usage, 13 minutes. Everything here is okay, except the usage, which is just average. Doesn't meet exactly the minimum needed, but it's not bad at all. Obviously, this game is a no-brainer. You should not kill it. You should scale it as soon as possible. And last example, and I think this is a very, very good example of how critical it is to look at the other KPIs and why you need to be flexible, is String Pool, a very good game that is being released today. And if you look at the top charts, you can see it there. 29-cent CPI, day one, 30%, 24-hour usage, 19 minutes. Now I can tell you that the initial testing of this game had high CPI. It was anything between 40, 50, and even 60 cents in the initial tests that the publishing manager did. So if you saw that you have high CPI, day one, 30%, it's not quite there yet. But what she saw is that she had 19 minutes, over 90 minutes, only almost 20 minutes usage in the first 24 hours. And what this caused is that she did not give up on this game and worked together with the studio and iterated it again and again. And I think she did maybe 8 tests until she was able to reduce the CPI to 29 cents. And obviously, this game is a very good example of why a game can still be a profitable game, and you should not kill it. If you didn't have the usage, you wouldn't even know that you have a really good, profitable potential game in your hands. And she insisted on iterating again and again until she was able to reduce the CPI and make this an extremely scalable, profitable game. So, to summarize, why do we need flexible KPIs? First and most important thing is to understand that there are games that should not be killed because they can still be a profitable game. CPI and day one are important in order to understand if your game is a profitable game. But you also need to look at other metrics, like the first 24 hours usage. You should not only look at day one and day seven, you should only focus your efforts on day one. When you have this data, you understand what you need to put your efforts on. If you put too much efforts on day one and day seven, you're wasting your time and efforts. And if you have a good publisher that can create a dedicated team that will work together with the studio in order to improve the metrics, once you have the initial metrics there, this is what you should put your efforts on. You can later on improve the game, add depth, add layers, add meta game. So later on, the game can be a profitable game, but you first need to put your efforts and focus on CPI, day one, and usage, and not scatter your efforts on games that are not scalable. And again, there are a lot of games that you might have killed that could have been profitable if you didn't have the bigger picture and looked at all of the KPIs in order to understand what you need to do in order to improve the game. So this is one of the reasons that we've have our Publishing for All initiative. So the Publishing for All initiative is an opportunity for game developers that are looking to publish their game that can still be a profitable game, but doesn't meet the exact KPIs that most publishers look at in order to scale a game. We know today that there are a lot of games that publishers can kill because they're not profitable enough for the publisher, but they can still make a profit for the developers. And this is why we came out with the Publishing for All initiative to publish games that doesn't meet the KPIs needed in order to scale a regular publishing, a regular hyper casual game, but you shouldn't miss out. You shouldn't miss out on an opportunity to still publish this game. Everything that we've discussed here today and more is being taught on CrazyLabs. CrazyLabs is an accelerator for studios all around the world that want to enter the hyper-casual market. We offer facilities, mentoring, funding, and everything regarding prototyping, testing, and publishing hyper-casual games. Our hubs are currently in India, Israel, Turkey, Serbia, and soon also South Africa, and we're expanding more and more. So you can search the next hyper-casual Crazy Hub somewhere around you. Log on to CrazyLabs.com and search for the next Crazy Hub around you. That's it. Thank you very much.